I suppose it'd have been better if I'd never been born at all. That was George Bailey's conclusion at the pivotal moment of It's a Wonderful Life. He was so despondent, he was ready to jump off a bridge. But after being distracted from suicide, he goes on to see why life was worth living. If the teacher of Ecclesiastes had been there instead of George Bailey, the movie might have had a very different ending. At least if we were dealing with the chapter 6 teacher, one of the darkest passages in all the Bible. Clarence the angel might have said, what about your family? What about all the great achievements of your life? All the impact that you made in the community around you? In this chapter, the teacher would respond, yeah, what about them? I'm still unhappy. I have no guarantee for future happiness or peace of mind. From my vantage point, life isn't worth living. And then he jumps. What makes life worth living? How can we find happiness in this life? That's what America's all about, right? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The Wall Street Journal once wrote this: we may have life and liberty, but the pursuit of happiness isn't going so well. The passage brings us to the end of the first half of the book tonight. For a few weeks, if you've been with us, the teacher seemed to be making some progress. It seemed like he was finally starting to figure some things out. And as we read tonight, it's going to feel like he has regressed into that depressed obsessive that he was just a few chapters ago. And that's because he absolutely has. He's going to have a real bad night tonight. Remember, this whole book is the travel journal of an expert who is on a quest for satisfaction, a quest for meaning, a quest for ultimate happiness and well-being. In the last few sections, he had paused his quest. He took a quick detour to share with us a discovery or two that he made. And that's why we noticed that he started speaking more theologically, and he spoke more directly. As we saw last time, he actually looked at us in the face and he said, I have something to say to you, as opposed to just sort of speaking more generically. But tonight we see he's got his wanderlust again. He's got to get back out into the field, back on the hunt. These questions of meaning and purpose and laying hold of the good life or laying hold of ultimate satisfaction, these questions are gnawing at him. And as far as he's concerned, every day that these questions go unanswered, he feels like that is a day of his life wasted that he will never get back. As we read his travel journal, we will discover, as one commentator puts it, the teacher is left with no absolute values to live for, not even any practical certainties to plan for. It's not a good place to be. Verse 1. Here's a tragedy I have observed under the sun, and it weighs heavily on humanity. When reading Ecclesiastes, you need to always remember, we have to always remind ourselves about these key phrases. There's a bunch of them, but under the sun is one of the main key phrases, and we need to understand what that means. Under the sun is the scope and perspective of the teacher's research, of his findings. He means life on earth disconnected from a personal interactive relationship with God. He's speaking, we would say, in modern vernacular, from a secular humanist perspective. Not an atheistic perspective, but just a secular humanist perspective. And that's why he can't find what he's looking for. And that's really the message of Ecclesiastes, that you cannot find what you're looking for if you try to bypass a personal, interactive, submitted relationship to God. In his travels, the teacher discovered what he says, a tragedy, a terrible sickness, something evil, and something that isn't rare but is happening all the time. That's what he means here in this verse. Oh man, what is it? What is this plague, this new, pandemic that you have discovered? Let's take a look at verse 2. God gives a person riches, wealth, and honor so that he lacks nothing of all he desires for himself, but God does not allow him to enjoy them. Instead, a stranger will enjoy them. This is futile and a sickening tragedy. That's the tragedy? That rich people are a little bit unhappy? I think, I read that and I'm like, who cares, right? But that's a bad attitude to have. That reveals more about me than about this verse. But the truth is, it's not just, well, this is a tragedy. Rich people don't have it so good. It's about much more than that. It's what this plague reveals about our world and about life and about the hope of humanity. That's what he's talking about. That's the problem. You see, this person, these people that the teacher is talking about, they have riches, wealth, honor, fame. They possess all the things that the world has to offer. All of it. They have every treasure, every good gift that the world can give. But what we find here is that having them is not the same as enjoying them. And that's the big problem. Remember what we learned all the way back in chapter 2. We cannot enjoy life apart from God. That is a bedrock principle written into the cosmos as much as gravity or the laws of thermodynamics. And that's exactly what the teacher and the people he's describing in our text tonight are trying to do. They're trying to break this immutable law of God, where they say we don't actually need God. We don't need connection with him. We don't need communication with him. We don't need his intervention. We don't need his grace. We will go to the storehouses, to the treasures of the world to get everything that we need. We will, in a sense, this is just the same thing that we read all the way back in Genesis. First in the garden, well, we don't really need God. I'll just take the fruit myself. Or then fast forward to a greater human society in Babylon there. We're going to build our tower. We will touch heaven. We will make a name for ourselves. We don't actually need God. We certainly don't need his rules. We don't need his commands. We don't need to bow our knees to him. And so that's what the teacher is trying to do. And that's the people that he's describing tonight. That's what they're trying to do, to bypass this law of God. And the problem is, as they bypass this law, they discover that what the world offers is smoke. It is hevel. It is futility. It's not solid. It doesn't last. And having those things is not the same as enjoying them. If you list the overall wealth of all the nations of the world, like the gross wealth of the world, we in the United States sit at the very top of that list. Let's say, well, I don't necessarily feel as wealthy as people here, there, or everywhere, right? Okay, if we even adjust that number for per capita wealth, here in the United States, we are still number 3, bronze medal out of 195 countries. So let's call us at the top, right? Meanwhile, we have the highest suicide rate of all the wealthy nations. Why is that? Shouldn't that be the opposite? Shouldn't the poorest be the most desperate, the most self-harming, the most suicidal? But that's not what we find when you investigate the wider world in studies like this. Now, is the teacher saying here that every rich person is secretly depressed and suicidal? No, absolutely not. And we've talked in previous passages, having wealth, even if you're a Christian, is not a bad thing in and of itself. In fact, he says, hey, God, even here, God gives a person wealth. It is a gift from God, right? We look at these characters in the Bible, whether it's Abraham in the Old Testament, Lydia in the New Testament, people with a lot of material possessions. It's not a bad thing to have if the Lord has given it to you and has led you into that life. It is the pursuit of wealth. It is the love of wealth. It is making wealthier God that causes all these problems. So the teacher is not saying that every rich person is depressed and suicidal. He's speaking generally in trends that we can observe even scientifically today. But even on a smaller level, if we look within at our own hearts and are a little bit honest, I think we all have known that feeling of finally getting something that we wanted so badly, something that we pined for and stared at and obsessed over. This happens a lot to youngsters, right? The kids, and as parents, you see this thing that they want, this thing that they're asking for Christmas, this thing that they're saving up their little bits of allowance for, and you're just thinking, oh my gosh, this is such a piece of junk. And the kids are so excited about it, right? And then finally we get the thing on Christmas morning, or when we finally saved up enough, and then maybe a year later, maybe months later, maybe a few hours later, we find our hearts are no longer thumping for that thing anymore. We've all experienced that on some level, big or small. The thing we realized didn't bring the satisfaction we were really hoping it would. When a man in the crowd wanted Jesus to decide an inheritance dispute between him and a family member, what did Jesus say? He said, "Friend, one's life is not in the abundance of his possessions." It's the wrong focus. So this guy was saying, hey, I've got Jesus Christ. Even if he didn't understand that Jesus was the Messiah, he's there listening to Jesus because he recognizes Jesus Christ teaches like no one ever. He is a rabbi to settle disputes. He is the speaker of truth. He is, the words of God are flowing from his mouth. And he's like, can you get more of the inheritance for me? That's what you want to spend your 5 seconds with Jesus on? If we think about it that way, if you had, I don't know, whoever it is, if you had 5 minutes to talk to the expert of experts, if you had 5 minutes to talk to Jesus Christ, what are you going to ask him? And he says, well, I want you to give me more stuff, Jesus. And Jesus is like, man, your focus is altogether wrong. The thing doesn't bring satisfaction. That is the wrong answer to the question that your heart is asking. And the question your heart is asking is, can I have fulfillment? Can I have, lasting purpose? Can I have a life that's worth living? Now, notice the wording here in verse 2. This fellow in verse 2 lacks nothing he could possibly want for himself. Notice the focus of these people that the teacher is talking about. And frankly, we know that the teacher is one of these people, right? Go all the way back to the beginning of the book, and he is one of these people. He has all of the wealth of the world. He has everything he could possibly want, every convenience, every comfort, every pleasure. He has all of these things. So he's one of these people. So he's not just describing one guy that he sees on the street corner. He's describing a certain characteristic of the human heart. And it says he lacks nothing he could possibly want for himself. He's looking for personal pleasure. It's all about him, his feelings, his wants. They want to always feel the feelings of happiness, never bothered or inconvenienced by life, never encumbered by your needs, because after all, my needs are the ones that matter. Right? We saw this when Solomon, the teacher, was talking about, well, I thought maybe I could find ultimate fulfillment and satisfaction by great human achievement, great human works, building things and designing things and growing an empire. Of course, he did that on the backs of slave labor, right? He talked about that. I had so many slaves, you can't even believe it. And it's like, well, pause. Are you worried about their satisfaction? No, absolutely not. I'm worried about my satisfaction. But still, he's left unsatisfied. Now, the teacher blames this problem on God. God's fault that this happened. God does not allow me to enjoy these things. How dare he? But, pause. If God is God and we are who he says we are, and the teacher accepts that, we've seen that the teacher believes in God, right? And he recognizes that there's a very vast disparity between God in heaven and humans on earth. He says, God dwells in heaven, let your words be few, right? So we see some of these windows into the theology of the teacher. Solomon is speaking to us as a secular humanist, right? But if that's all true, why should God allow the teacher to enjoy all of the benefits of his temporal richness? Why should God allow him to find ultimate satisfaction in things that will not last? He shouldn't do that. God owes us absolutely nothing except judgment and wrath. Those are the wages that are due to us. Why should God participate in this person's selfish enslavement to a temporal way of life? That I want to feel great, that I want to feel pleasure, that I want to be unencumbered by any concerns around me, that I just want to always feel good all the time, and I demand that God give me that. It's a completely wrong perspective. Remember when Adam and Eve sinned, and they said, we don't need God, we will take of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil ourselves. Whoops, that didn't work. And then what did God say in that instant? He said, we can't let them now eat of the tree of life and stay in this state. We can't allow that because that would be ruin for them and for all of their offspring, and it's a big problem. No, God is not going to allow people who are in rebellion and war with him to feel eternal satisfaction for the choices that they're making. In the culture of this time, a successful life was measured by if you were wealthy, if you had a large family, and you lived to an old age. And so these are the three major things that he talks about in these opening verses. These are the big three, the big three values of that culture at that time. And as he speaks about them, the teacher is going to use extremes, absolutely fabulous wealth, 100 kids, fantastically long life. And throughout his point is, money can't buy you love, right? And in the next thing here, where he says here, 100 kids doesn't guarantee this person won't be hated and left unclaimed at the morgue one day, right? And so here's what he says in verse 3. A man may father 100 children and live many years. No matter how long he lives, if he's not satisfied by good things and does not even have a proper burial, I say that a stillborn child is better off than he. For he comes in futility and he goes in darkness, and his name is shrouded in darkness. And so there's no guarantee. So what we're seeing here is a picture of the person who, to the absolute furthest degree that none of us could ever hope to attain, absolute fantastic wealth that no one could ever get close to, like Elon Musk times 100, and 100 kids, and we're going to see like 2,000 years of life. And he says none of that will guarantee you fulfillment. But those are the big three things that the world at that time said, if you hit these markers, you are fulfilled. And he says, but it's not true. And so the teacher here kind of throws up his hands and he says, I did the thing. I did the thing. I built the empire. I filled to the treasure houses. I had the kids. I attained what the world said was the goal of all goals. So where's the promise of the relational fulfillment and family honor and the monument to my greatness after I died, that everyone will forever remember me? It doesn't exist because life is about more than numbers. One problem is that he was still worried about himself more than anyone else. Look, if he is not satisfied by good things, I want to feel good. My kids exist so that I can feel good about myself. And you think, you're not thinking about life correctly. We understand that because we're believers, right? And we understand the other part. But the teacher here is saying, what gives? I did the thing, and I'm still unsatisfied. And we see that, right? In It's a Wonderful Life. Probably, to me, the saddest moment of It's a Wonderful Life is when he comes home, George Bailey, and he's all upset. And his wife's trying to be, chipper, and the kids are playing their music and stuff like that. And he bursts out, why did we have to have all these kids? And you're like, oh, man. And the kids are like, we're sorry, Dad, That's like the worst part of the movie, but that's exactly what he's talking about. He's like, I thought kids were supposed to be a good thing. We're supposed to benefit me. And the teacher's saying here, I don't feel any better. And the reason is because his pursuit is self-satisfaction based off of the resources the world offers. But it's at this point that the teacher has his George Bailey moment. He says, man, it would be better if I had never been born. Verse 5, though a stillborn child does not see the sun and is not conscious, it has more rest than he. And put in parentheses, than me. That's what he's saying. He wants rest. He wants peace in his heart. He wants to have a heart and mind that is untroubled. But we live in a difficult, troubled world that is plagued by time, death, and chance. That's one of the themes of this book. And the teacher can't escape it, no matter how much money he has, no matter how much power he has, no matter how much achievement he does, no matter all of the things, he can't escape these things that are chasing him. And so in this dark moment, he says, I envy the child that died before birth. Is the Bible saying that it's better to be stillborn? Again, consider the scope of the study. The teacher is not speaking as a believer, right? The teacher is speaking as a secular humanist seeking purpose and meaning. He's not considering eternity. That's the whole point. It's all under the sun. He's trapped under the sun and saying, I just want what I can get here in this life because that's all that matters. As far as he's concerned, life ends at the grave. He's not talking about what happens to human souls after death. So sometimes people pull these verses out of Ecclesiastes because they are shocking to our Christian doctrine and ethic, but we have to understand what is what is the style of this book and what is the context of this book. And I think we've done a good job just reminding ourselves, okay, under the sun, this is what he's doing. This isn't Jesus speaking to us. It is the teacher, and those are two very different individuals. So no, the Bible's not saying it's better to be stillborn. From this vantage point, he's saying, okay, well, look, I can do all the right things and work myself to the bone to only have all of my riches taken away and my family relationships broken and end up with some debilitating disease that kills me with terrible suffering. Well, then what's the point? That's the question he's asking. In that case, if that's all there is to life, it would be much easier to be a stillborn baby. That's his conclusion, and from his perspective, he's not wrong, but he's forgetting the main piece of the puzzle. He's forgetting the major part of the equation. He has set God aside, set what God has revealed aside, and he's just trying to build a Tower of Babel for himself. Now, with that said, I will note this. Solomon considered this stillborn baby to be a person as much as the rich man with 100 children, right? He's saying, well, these are both people. This guy suffered a bunch. This person did not suffer a bunch. And so even though their experience was different, their essence was the same. In the strange political world we live in right now, you're hearing more and more Christians back away from the sanctity of life and from the importance of defending the unborn. I watched a thing the other day, a professor at Calvary University talking about how, well, we don't really know when a soul goes into a fetus, so. And you're like, wait, what? God knew your name from before the foundation of the earth. So, but look at what Solomon is saying here, even from the perspective of the teacher. He's like, well, that's a person. And that person has human value. So, verse 6, and if a person lives 1,000 years twice but does not experience happiness, do not both go to the same place. Let's say someone lives twice as long as the oldest person ever, Methuselah. We say he lived 1,000 years. He lived 969 years. Okay, he says, well, okay, somebody lives twice as long as that. Impossible, but death is still going to get them. Even if you lived 2,000 years, death is going to get you in the end. And living a long time doesn't guarantee a happy life. In fact, the more often the case is that the longer you live, the more opportunity you have to suffer under the sun. The teacher doesn't want to die, but he also doesn't see what the point of living is. It's very sad. And so after failing at finding satisfaction in the big three of his time and culture, right? Wealth, family, and old age, he then turns to, all right, well, let's think smaller. Let's go towards smaller pursuits now. How about day-to-day things like really killing it at work and getting run-of-the-mill satisfactions for my body and becoming the smartest guy in the room? And that's what the rest of the verses, or the next set of verses are. All of a person's labor is for his stomach, yet the appetite is never satisfied. Focusing on day-to-day pleasure didn't fare any better than his long-term whole life plans. The poor teacher, he's going the wrong way. So he's looking at the whole of life and he realizes that he's not getting any satisfaction. And so then instead of stepping beyond himself and saying, maybe I should turn and look to the God who I know made me and the God who's in heaven, he turns the wrong way and he starts thinking smaller. Well, let's just look at day-to-day things. But the problem is your stomach will always become hungry again, no matter how good the meal was that you had yesterday. Your eyes will never finish seeing. You'll never get to the point where it's like, it's full, I'm done seeing, I don't want to see anymore. The urge you satisfy today is going to return tomorrow, demanding another serving. That's just the way of things. This is what Ephesus called the hedonistic paradox. The more people pursue pleasure, the more elusive the goal becomes. Verse 8, what advantage then does the wise person have over the fool? What advantage is there for the poor person who knows how to conduct himself before others? Whether it's wealth, fame, intellect, or experiences, satisfaction is sold separately. That's what we think. We think we're going to get the thing. We're going to get satisfaction from the experience itself, from the thing itself, from the achievement itself. But as one commentator puts it, satisfaction is sold separately. You can't fill your heart with those things. You can impact your body, you can distract your mind, you can do certain things that will last for a while, but the eternal part of your heart will not be sated by anything that this world has to offer. The wisdom of this world, the experience of this world, the treasure of this world cannot bring peace to your heart, because the world is temporal and there is eternity in your heart. And you can't scratch that itch with anything the world has to offer. And so the teacher turns from one pursuit to another, right? What about money? What about family? What about old age? What about pleasures? What about being good at work? What about being extremely wise from the world's perspective? And each time he's left more frustrated than before. Michael Eaton writes, the teacher is slamming every door except the door of faith. And that's the whole point. He's going to culminate at the end of the book and say, I found the door that we can walk through to receive the satisfaction that we're so desperate for. Verse 9, better what the eyes see than wandering desire. This too is futile and a pursuit of the wind. For me, the New Living Translation helps clear up this verse. It says, enjoy what you have rather than desiring what you don't have. Just dreaming about nice things is meaningless, like chasing the wind. Now listen, we don't want to quash the dreams of little ones, but once it's like when Paul says, when I was a child, I did things like a child. Once we become adults and understand more of the world and what's going on here, especially as we look at the revelation of God's word, some dreams need to be left behind, right? Worldly dreams, unrealistic dreams, dreams that buy into the lie of the culture around us. We've got to give up chasing the wind. Instead of cultivating desire for what we don't have, we should cultivate thankfulness and contentment with what we do have. Now remember what Paul told Timothy, godliness with contentment is great gain. And that's what the teacher is after, right? Profit, gain, advantage, lasting abundance in the heart. That's what he's looking for. And he's trying to find it anywhere he can, all these different pursuits, going to an extent none of us could ever dream. And meanwhile, for the believer, God comes to us through his apostles and through the rest of the scripture, and he says, you can have the advantage, you can have the lasting abundance, you can have what you're looking for. And here's an important aspect of that, godliness with contentment. By being content with what you have, you become abundantly satisfied in your heart. When we walk with God, he gives us life more abundantly in the now and in the not yet. Eternal life, right? We don't just say, God doesn't just say, I've saved you and now I'll see you when you die. He says, I've saved you and now I'm going to give you life more abundantly starting right now. Everlasting life starting right now. Spiritual, supernatural gifts and blessings starting right now. He gives joy for the temporal and regenerates our lives with the eternal. Verse 9 is the close of the first half of the book. Verses 10 through 12 then serve as a bridge to start us into the second half. And as we head toward part 2, we see the teacher still very pessimistic. Verse 10, whatever exists was given its name long ago, and it is known what mankind is. He's not able to contend with the one stronger than he. The teacher spent this chapter complaining. He's offended that he can't find happiness for himself despite his wealth, despite his greatness, despite his achievement. He's mad about it. But we see here he's wise enough to realize that it will do no good arguing these complaints with God. Now, Job, in his book, he had complaints for God. And for a time, he said, I'd like to get God down here. I'd like to talk to him and about all this stuff because I think I can prove that like I'm right and God has messed up here. And of course, God came and he said, I have a few dozen questions for you. Were you there at the foundation of the world? Have you seen the storehouses in heaven? Did you make Leviathan? And Job says, oh, gotcha. You're right. I have nothing else to say, right? And so if the teacher had been one of Job's friends, he probably would have said, you should probably just kill yourself, right? If he's the first half of the book teacher. But if the teacher's one of Job's friends and Job started complaining, he would have been like, I hear you, man, but like that's not an argument you can win. God is sovereign, and just don't complain to him about it. But scholars will also point out that in this verse, the teacher is making specific, purposeful references to Adam in the opening chapters of Genesis. The problems of life, of unfulfillment, of peace, and rest in the heart are nothing new. They have existed since the fall of man. It is the result of sin and the broken relationship between God and man that human beings feel this way. Dwayne Garrett writes, no sage, however brilliant or daring, has substantially added to Adam's discovery. Adam has already shown us what we are. And so if we want to know why things are the way they are, why people have such struggle and difficulty in life, look to the Word of God that lays it all out and lays out the path of escape for us. The Bible shows us what mankind is, that we are mistake makers, that we are easily distracted and deceived, that when the chips are down, we'd rather help ourselves than others, the woman you gave me, right? That we need to be rescued from ourselves and from this fallen world under the sun. Verse 11, for when there are many words, they increase futility. What is the advantage for mankind? So the teacher wants out. He realizes that he is stuck in a system, and the more he finds, the less he likes what he finds. Finally, verse 12, for who knows what is good for anyone in life in the few days of his futile life that he spends like a shadow? Who can tell anyone what will happen after him under the sun? Not real great at parties. He threw a lot of parties, but you didn't want to talk to him at these parties. So the teacher asked some rhetorical questions here, but they are questions that need answering. Where does good come from? What can make a life which is full of struggle and chance and futility and ultimately death? What makes that life worth living? Can the world answer these questions and offer me what I need? Here's the thing, the world claims that it can. The world comes to you and says, we can solve this issue in your heart. We can satisfy you. We can give you a life worth living. We know the way to where you want to go. But is it true? It's not true. The gospel tells us the truth, that the world can't offer you a meaningful life, that it can't offer you lasting peace. It can offer you temporal wealth, but as we saw in earlier passages and see through living examples around us today, wealth often destroys life rather than benefiting it. The world can offer you temporal pleasures for a time, but they will not ultimately satisfy. But then the other side of the gospel is God has arrived and has, out of his abundant grace, said, I will give you the thing that you're looking for. I will fix these problems. I will give you life more abundantly. I'll let you have what you really need. And he alone can make life enjoyable and can make life worth living. He alone can make your life more than worthwhile. He makes it eternal. The teacher was desperate for peace and for rest. And what did Jesus say at the end of the Gospel of John? He said, peace I leave you. My peace I give to you. I do not give to you as the world gives, right? Because that's no kind of peace. And so he says, so don't let your heart be troubled or fearful. Jesus is the answer to all of these questions that the teacher is asking. Christ came so that we can lay hold of all the things the teacher is looking for. Purpose and meaning and enjoyment and contentment and joy, abundant life worth living, fullness in that eternal part of our heart. John put it really plainly in his first letter, the one who has the Son has life, has what the teacher is looking for. The one who does not have the Son of God does not have life. They may have riches, they may have years, they may have abundance in all these other places, but they don't have life. The teacher leaves the first half of the book brokenhearted. In this terribly tragic moment, he looks on a stillborn child here, right? And he realizes, my whole life has been a miscarriage. That's what he's realizing here. And he said, and we think, well, how can that happen? He was so rich. He was so powerful. He was so smart. He was so successful. He was so important. He was so famous. He was so everything. But it's because satisfaction is sold separately. And if you don't have the Son of God, you don't have life. The teacher forgot what he himself said back in chapter 2, that you can't have lasting purpose and you can't have true enjoyment in life unless you have a personal relationship with God, who is the giver of life and the giver of purpose and satisfaction and every good gift. You can't have joy, he said, unless you please God. Okay, well then how do I please God? Well, it's very simple. We please God by having faith in him, by believing him. And to me, I was just thinking about this, not necessarily just believing in him. You know, the teacher believed in God, that a God existed and that God gave him life and that God was sovereign over the universe. He believed a significant number of things about God. He believed in a God, but he didn't believe God, who said, follow me, submit yourself to me, obey my precepts, do what I'm asking you to do so that you can have life more abundantly. We need to believe him now, actively, believing his prescriptions, his directions, believing that he has a plan for our lives, and then following him to discover that plan. A life of purpose and joy and satisfaction and rest is ours to receive from the Lord. He has left it for us. He is giving it to us. Now, whether that includes material prosperity or not, he still leaves us joy. He still leaves us contentment, satisfaction, purpose. Because what we are learning through the teacher is that material prosperity does not give us those things. The Lord gives those things. And he is ready to give you temporal fulfillment and eternal purpose if you will believe him, walk with him, and be born again into this new life that he's offering.